Hello and welcome back to our 6-week Skillful Living program. My name is Venerable Tarpa. This is our 4th week and our 8th class of the program. We're really moving along here. This week we are going to be focusing on understanding our suffering. But first, let's briefly review a little bit of what we talked about yesterday. In yesterday's class, we focused on understanding our suffering. We talked about the nature and causes of suffering, that our suffering is caused by obsessive desire and our ignorance to the way life works. We also talked about that much of the causes of our suffering are from mental afflictions. Does anybody have any questions about yesterday's class? Are you starting to understand how so much of our suffering comes from our desire and ignorance? Is that clear enough to everybody? Oh, I got a lot of nodding heads out there. Oh, yeah, we know everything, Tarpa. Can you see the causes of our suffering as afflictions and not aspects of our true nature? That's an important thing. Acquired, the texts like to say. Clinton, please share.
Yeah, on the afflictions part, there was a conversation about whether or not they're chosen or intentional. And I was curious about your take on whether or not they're also natural. And it requires a differentiation between true nature and natural. By natural, I mean you have it at birth, not that it's true nature. Like things that could be byproducts of evolution. But that's not true nature, but they are inherent in us when we're born. That's a different type of affliction than one that happens because of cultural conditioning after birth, right? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And to go back to the source, in the early Buddha sutras, these are known as the three unwholesome and wholesome roots. So they talk about these acquired roots, though they're natural. We're born into ignorance. Nothing's more natural than that. But but they are acquired through that ignorance, and those afflictions arise. But then we have the three roots, and the roots are inherent potentialities within us for goodness. And they word it very strangely because they don't want to make it sound like they're essential aspects of us, because Buddhism likes to assert that there really aren't any of these concrete things, that everything arises from causes and conditions. So they like to call them potentialities. So they talk about goodness reliably, virtue reliably arises when afflictions are removed. I thought that was the strangest way of trying to dance around that
Mm.
subject. So yes, they're natural because um, they're in our lives. I'm trying to think of a way to put this. In the same breath, you could say that illness is natural, right? To be born with a genetic defect or a genetic illness, and to suffer from that your whole life. Um, Disease is a natural part of our existence, but we wouldn't say that that genetic default is the person. We would always see it as an affliction that genetically or just bad luck that they ended up with it. We would never assume it was part of the person. In that same way, we see our mental afflictions in this way. And then what you said prior to that, I wouldn't necessarily say that our afflictions are intentional. We act through them, but it's not really our intent to do so. It's more of our inability to say no to them, right? They color our lives, they change our perspective and our perspective, our perceptions and perspective. and and they arise, and then we have difficulty saying no to them. They're habitual.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a more accurate assessment.
Thank you.
Excellent question, Clint. Anybody else want to test my knowledge of afflictions? Okay. Hey, let's move on to today's teaching. So, um, in Buddhism, since happiness and suffering represent the spectrums of the quality of our life, we talked about that yesterday, that all our experiences, all of them, are somewhere on that spectrum between suffering and happiness. Um, then gaining happiness and transcending suffering are therefore synonymous, right? Makes sense. The same practices can achieve both goals. So, back in lesson 4 on cultivating happiness, we shared the two primary methods for gaining happiness. And of course, they turn out to be the two primary methods for getting rid of suffering. And we talked about that being the threefold training, which is the Buddhist path. So we're saying, how do I leave suffering? How do I gain happiness? By following the Buddhist path. That's what it's designed to do, right? And then we also had the 4 steps of acceptance that we use when difficulties arise. Of these, the most effective tools for working with our suffering problem and challenges are the applications of understanding and acceptance, which are kind of interwoven through both the threefold training and the 4 steps of acceptance. So if we begin with understanding, we learn everything we can about suffering, exploring every aspect of it, its causes, its conditions, its triggers, and its cessation or ending. And through that understanding, we then strive to accept our suffering as a and natural and expected aspect of our lives. Um, and so when we talk about that, like, we don't really like the idea of accepting our suffering. We want to get rid of it, but in some ways we have to accept that it is a natural aspect of our lives, and uh, uh, and it can sound simply like a dialogue where we say, "Of course I suffer. I possess a mind and body." Right? This is maybe what the Buddha would say, but we all know possessing a mind and body is suffering. And that's not necessarily a Buddhist thing. I mean, everybody knows that, right? Everybody knows that if you have a body, things are going to go wrong. You're going to have accidents. Stuff happens. And we all know, having these complicated minds that we do, they're constantly a source of horrible suffering. And if you all remember in your morning affirmations, which I hope everybody is continuing to recite every morning, we have the 5 remembrances, right? That's like the perfect affirmation when we're talking about accepting our suffering. That's what that affirmation is. I am the nature to grow old. I cannot avoid aging. I'm the nature to become ill or injured. I can't avoid illness or injury. I am the nature to die. I cannot avoid death. Death is a whole bunch of suffering, isn't it? All that is dear to me and everyone I love are the nature to change. There's no way to escape being separated from it. So, in that affirmation, you can see the mechanism here for two things: understanding our suffering and accepting it, right? This affirmation is built on those two principles. And in Buddhism, no matter what it is, the very first thing we do is understand it, whether it's happiness, whether it's suffering, life is unfair, whatever it is. The first thing Buddhists do is they try to understand it. Of course, we do it through the 4 steps of acceptance. First, we become present, right, and accept it. But It's through that understanding that we can transcend, right? So, anyways, that's the big takeaway on how we work with any and all afflictions, problems, challenges. It could be a problem at work. You have some difficult situation with a problem or a person, right? The very first thing to do is try to understand what's happening, and then at some point accept it for the reality it is. And again, we always talk about this, but we when we talk about acceptance, we are not talking about resignation or giving up. We're talking about the opposite. We're talking about when we understand and accept our suffering in a mature way, we actually gain an unparalleled advantage to working with it, right? When we're in denial, when we don't see things the way they truly are, it really limits our ability, our wisdom, our options when working with things. Although the threefold training and the four steps of acceptance work with our suffering at the deepest root level. This is one of the great things of Buddhism, where nowadays you see memes and advice for how to be happy, but they're all band-aids. Some of them are very good, don't get me wrong, but they're all band-aids. The thing about Buddhism is it goes to the deepest, most profound level. There's often people make the analogy between a band-aid, getting a band-aid for a terrible wound or infection instead of seeing a surgeon, right? Buddhism is the surgery, getting right to it so you can eradicate it forever, where putting band-aids on a terrible wound is just going to help temporarily. But with that said, we also have additional methods for reducing or eliminating suffering as well. And in Buddhism, especially the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism, they love their antidotes, using antidotes to things. Um, and one of the most effective antidotes, which we've been talking about since the very first class, is the antidote of virtue, uh, which includes our positivity, optimism, and joy, having a constructive, positive mental framework and mental states, right? Um, and so we talked about one of the more interesting aspects of the mind, which we use extensively in Buddhism, is the fact the mind can't entertain two concepts or thoughts at the same time. While the mind is focused on something, it can only focus on one at a time. So, of course, we use that by immersing the mind in constructive emotion and positive mental states. Um, and at the same time, while we're doing that, at the same time, we can't entertain negativity. That's one of the reasons that mala beads work so well. You see a lot of Buddhists with mala beads, and if you're in Tibet, everybody has them, and everybody's reciting them all day long. You could see them on the tip of their tongue. They're reciting them. And the idea is by reciting those mantras, which are positivity, they're connected to positive, constructive mental states. You're often contemplating the virtuous qualities of the deity, hoping to acquire them or inspire them yourself. Well, while they're doing those, the mind can't sneak off and think about negative or non-virtuous things. Um, but this trick allows us to maintain and habituate positive thoughts, attitudes, and habits, while at the same time lessening the hold of habits and patterns of negative mental states, attitudes, and behaviors on us. But this isn't think happy thoughts advice, which is uh, a popular thing in modern psychology. Uh, Instead, what we're talking about is actively cultivating constructive and positive mental states. And from that, happiness arises, right? We're not just trying to be happy. That would be false positivity, which we talked about. We're talking about getting to the roots and in cultivating those constructive and positive mental states. Another powerful antidote is the application of patience. So, patience is understood a little different in Buddhism. Patience, what was the definition we had for common patience? It was a, a positive tolerance to a situation. It was like that. It's like waiting with a positive attitude, right? But in Buddhism, it's quite different. Buddhism, oh, I remember, it was good-natured tolerance. I ran across that definition somewhere on the web. Patience is good-natured tolerance. And that's a really good definition, I think, for general patience. But in Buddhism, patience is more akin to non-reactivity and non-action. I remember a teacher told me that when when somebody triggers me, there's some kind of stimuli, and instead of getting angry or anything, I was instructed to become a block of wood, right? Which took a little explaining, but to become a block of wood, to be non-reactive or non-reactive. Um, and it doesn't have to be taken to an extreme. The point the teacher was making is that, consciously become patient, objective, non-reactive. And of course, when you do that, it allows space for skills and wisdom to be applied. Um, I imagine the quality of patience in this regard as I picture it like being a camera lens, right? Like I'm a camera lens looking out at the world, taking in the world exactly the way it is, without interpretation or judgment, just witnessing what's in front of me. To me, that's what the teacher was trying to tell me. Instead of being a block of wood, he should have said, become a camera or a microphone, your choice. And another method for working with suffering, which we will be practicing this week, and this is an important one. We touched on it yesterday, and in today's meditation, a couple of people talked about it. And it is to not personify our afflictions, right? We talked about that. We don't say, with language, you'd say, I'm an angry person, I'm a lazy person, where we want to change that and say, I'm afflicted by anger, I'm feeling anger, right? I'm troubled by or afflicted by laziness. But the idea is don't personify your afflictions. They're not you. It's like an illness. You wouldn't say, I'm a cold. You would say, I have a cold. I caught a cold. But you wouldn't identify with the illness, right? You wouldn't say, I'm a flu. We say, I got the flu. Well, I want you to start looking at your afflictions in the same way. And we do this by understanding that we're not our afflictions. And likewise, we are not our thoughts, emotions, or mental states. Instead, these aspects are merely conditions of our existence. They're not who we are, they're conditions of our existence, meaning that we experience our afflictions, but we're not those afflictions. We experience thoughts, but we're not our thoughts. We experience emotions, but we're not our emotions. We experience mental states, but we're not our mental states, right? Those things occur here in these organisms we are, but they're not us. By disidentifying ourselves, excuse me, from our afflictions, thoughts, emotions, mental states, we gain distance and some freedom from them. This is equally beneficial when dealing with others, or even more so when we disidentify other people's afflictions from their true nature. We see that they, like us, are also prisoners of their own confusion and conditioned habits and patterns, right? Prisoners of afflictions and limitations that they never chose, that they, like us, are waged in daily battle to transcend their afflictions, striving to be the best they can. In other words, we place the blame on the affliction and not the person. Another teacher I had talked about it as if somebody attacked you with a stick and was beating you with the stick, you wouldn't get mad at the stick. You'd get mad at the real cause, the person wielding the stick, right? That's kind of the same thing here. You don't get mad at the person who just called you an insulting name. You get mad at the ignorance that's driving that person. The person's just the stick. It's the ignorance, the afflictions that are the cause of it, right? So, again, this will be one of our practices this week, uh, working on disidentifying ourselves and others from our afflictions and limitations. My hope is that you'll begin to realize that it's actually our afflictions and limitations that are the true cause of our problems and conflicts, and not ourselves or each other. That's kind of a startling comment, isn't it? That goes against so much of what we are of our worldview, right? To realize that it's our afflictions and limitations that are the true causes of our problems and afflictions, and not ourselves or each other. But I believe it's very, very true. And the source of our afflictions is our ignorance. That's ignorance is the defining affliction from which all afflictions come from. And we talked about ignorance being uh, not knowing, knowing the wrong thing, or not wanting to know. Have any of you been pondering the third one, which always intrigues me? You're kind of getting an idea. Do you know anybody that's like that? That lives their life just kind of in denial of things. They just simply like life is okay as long as you don't tell me that. I have a certain friend, he does it with everything. I'll ask him a question, and no matter what the question I ask, he'll always say no and then answer the question. He's always just putting up a barricade there. Um, but it's our ignorance and misunderstandings that causes us to strive for unproductive goals. It's our ignorance and misunderstandings that causes us to act unskillfully. And it's our ignorance and misunderstanding that causes us to make poor choices. Does anybody have any question? What a lovely presentation.
I
I
kind of
must
take it
say.
a step further.
Yeah,
My thought on it is that our suffering, is caused by our association with I that really doesn't exist. There are our our problems that we come in are from our minds and the cloudiness of that, and our association with the me, my, and I, how it affects us, in the long term. That would be the cause of the suffering, is how our mind interprets it. uh the afflictions are manifestations of our mind, and how it's processing it beyond our physical limitations.
very much so. At the deepest level, Buddhism asserts that all of our issues arise from our relationship or understanding of ourselves. But to make something clear, Buddhism never denies the self or the I. Buddhism asserts that we misunderstand it, but it exists as a conceptual, functional label. When you use the word I a whole bunch of times throughout the day, there's no problem with it as long as you understand its nature. The problem is we exaggerate the sense of I, believing it's more of a soul, like it's an actual component within us, which it isn't. It's just a useful conceptual label for all things pertaining to Tarpa. my robe, my house, my things. So yeah, we're never in denial of that. That was a mistake that Buddhism made for 1,000 years.
So where would the I be? The
Oh,
me.
there's no location. It's just it's a concept generated by the mind.
So a concept, to my understanding, really wouldn't be a thing. It would just be an idea. So the mind,
No,
the I,
concepts are things. A conceptual thing is a phenomena, and it's just as real. Buddhism believes they're just as real as physical phenomena. Some like the concept. All of language is based on concept, and clearly language is real. Borders of countries, money, marriage. They're all conceptual, but they're all very real.
I mean, I could have the concept that I could light water on fire, but that really wouldn't make that real.
Well, it's a wrong concept. So a concept, technically, they talk about it needing an appropriate base. You can call a block of wood a camera, but
Right.
it's not going to take pictures. It has to have an appropriate base. But a very good question, Ananda. But getting back to it, you're exactly right. At the deepest level, which goes far beyond this elementary program, the real problems are us misunderstanding who we are, what we are, how life works, how to properly relate to others, how to properly live. That's where it all begins. Thank you, Ananda. Anybody else? Hey, oh, Clint, please share.
Just to make sure I got it right in my mind, desire caused by ignorance, where does afflictions fall into that chain? Is ignorance is not caused by afflictions because it's sort of inherent, or is it?
Ignorance is an affliction that causes other afflictions.
Okay.
Desire is one of those afflictions. And then traditional Buddhism would say they come from prior lives. But just to be a baby born into the world not knowing anything, that is, according to Buddhism, an affliction in itself. So it doesn't mean that the baby is somehow impure. It just means that through rebirth, it doesn't remember anything from its past life. It's starting again, and that ignorance is an affliction. But Buddhism believes the three roots are acquired.
In my mind, ignorance, the opposite of ignorance is
Clarity,
understanding. Yeah, okay.
clarity. That's right. And so when we're born, our mission moving forward is developing clarity. And like you said, understanding.
Right,
And
which requires more than information, that it needs practice as well to equal wisdom, right? I would imagine.
that's right. Uh, yeah, knowledge isn't just information. It's like so much of it's genetic. Like a evolutionary biologist was talking about how um, even at the subtlest level, simple cells, the whole idea of dividing is or reproducing is to pass on understanding, knowledge. And if you think about it, every species, genetically, they pass on the prior experience to the next. And that's the process of evolution, with each species becoming more complex. So it seems like that's kind of the building blocks of life itself, is passing on. Yeah, knowledge is a too small of a term to use because so much of it is subconscious, so much of it's behavioral, right? And so much of it's genetic, where the next generation is actually built differently to succeed and survive. So, yeah, evolution, wild. You got it, Clint.
Thank you.
Hey, what do you guys think about this not embodying our afflictions? Does that sound like an interesting thing? Just identifying with it. So it works great with other people. Like you're having problems with somebody, if you can recognize that it's actually whatever their ignorance, they're not knowing. Some people act in a way that obviously they just don't know what proper social behavior is in that situation. But as soon as you can acknowledge the affliction and you think, well, maybe they didn't have a proper upbringing and they don't know proper manners or whatever it might be. As soon as you can recognize that, you'll find that all your anger goes out the window and you can tolerate the situation. You can accept it. And it's a very, very powerful practice. Okay, I got more to share with you. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about working with negative thoughts and memories because this is something that afflicts so many people. I think for most of us, we see these negative thoughts and memories as unpleasant yet normal aspects of our lives. And most of us have no idea that freedom from them is actually possible. We just assume that's our lives and we're going to deal with it forever. Negative thoughts arise mainly from our afflictions, and therefore transcending them is fairly straightforward, but not necessarily easy. Um, as we transcend our afflictions and limitations, we naturally begin to transcend negative thoughts and thinking. Meaning, as you work towards becoming more understanding, more virtuous, more aware, the positive progress we make begins to trickle down into our subconscious, where negative thoughts and thinking is generated. Slowly, with patience, negativity diminishes. And if some of you remember from our conversation on karma, and that pretty much defines the mechanism of karma as a momentum and the process of purification through karma. However, working with negative memories is a bit more complex. Um, there are many theories why we experience unprovoked negative memories, which often arise for no apparent reason whatsoever. We've all had the experience. I used to be quite plagued by this when I was younger, especially when I had a busy mind like working. So we all live the experience. You're having a beautiful day. You're out on your electric bike whizzing around town, having the time of your life. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, this embarrassing, regretful, painful memory arises in your mind of Ricky Rezepka pushing you down on the playground when you're in fourth grade and embarrassing you. There seems no apparent connection to the present moment, and yet there it is, right? So I've heard and searched for uh, explanations for this in Buddhism. And so far, I don't really remember coming across any discourses by the Buddha on the topic. But the most compelling hypothesis I did come across was actually from psychology. And I heard an assertion that the cause of our negative memories may be a protective strategy. And I really like this hypothesis that the mind is actually trying to protect itself, protect you against future suffering by recalling, analyzing, and finding solutions to those past painful experiences. So when they arise again, you're going to be prepared. You'll know how to push Ricky Rezepka back. For myself, just knowing that there is quite possibly a good reason or a potential benefit to those weird negative memories that come up um, makes the experience for me somewhat acceptable, right? Uh, Even if it's not true, now when they come up, I just say, okay, the brain's trying to protect me, but I can set it aside because of that, right? But Whenever we get caught up in that world of why, like a little kid that just keeps saying, why, that is a big second arrow thing. And because there's a torment in not knowing, and there's a torment to continually trying to figure something out. But when we could at least accept it and set it aside to any extent, we benefit from that. The ultimate method for transcending our negative thoughts and memories is to gain control over the thinking process, which of course is a very advanced level of Buddhist practice, which gives us the ability to choose what to think or even whether we want to think at all. This includes the ability to actively choose our emotions and mental states. We've already been working with that, haven't we? All of the practices that you've been doing so far, we've been cultivating and therefore slowly building your ability to uh, to develop mental states, to cultivate them, to experience them, and sustain them. So you're doing it right now. But guess what? With practice, you can get really good at it. And this ability is developed through the cultivation of, again, the threefold training, the Buddhist path itself. Any questions about that? Negative mental thoughts and memories. Who has some experience with that? I'd like to ask. Everybody raises their hand, right? It's true. It's a human thing. Jan, did you have a question or are you raising your hand? Raising your hand.
No, I was just raising my hand to say yes. I'm plagued very much by that memory thing, but that I think that's going to be really helpful to know that it's just a psychological mechanism, and to be able, I think I'll be able to just hopefully dismiss it now that I know that.
Yeah. And again, working with afflictions, when you could start to reduce the strength of afflictions, those qualities, negative thinking, and those also diminish. So again, I was really plagued by this when I was younger. I was just constantly thinking negative things when I was working and things. Nowadays, I get it so little, so rare they come up, and they're so easy for me to dismiss. Okay. So another practice for working with suffering, especially anxiety, is an SBT practice we call trust, the practice of trust. Now, trust here isn't a blind trust, but instead an informed trust. When we say practicing trust, we're not talking about blind faith. Instead, we're talking about learning to trust in ourselves, our judgment, skills, and our ability to learn, adapt, and find solutions to whatever may arise. This includes trusting in the relationships and support mechanisms we've established in our lives. I often would call this karma, right? This positive, virtuous momentum that you've created in your life, right? Think about the things that you've intentionally done to improve your life, like doing good at school so you could go to a good college, getting a degree. Think about any skills you get so you could get a good job and make a good living, right? These are all aspects of our karma. Why? Karma is intentional volition, right? Intentional choice. And so all those things you've done have created a momentum in your life, haven't they? Having a good education creates momentum for a lot of opportunities to come your way. The same with work skills. And it's the same with your relationships, right? The friendships you make, especially if you're networking in the corporate world or something. The friends you make bring you amazing opportunities. But think about when things are difficult, that you have a family there to help you get through it, right? You have a spouse, kids, mother, father, friendships, whatever it is. We create that, right? Those things just don't come by themselves. They come through our intentional choices. We deem those as important. We know that they're beneficial. We gain those, and that's part of your karma. These very real world physical things in our lives are a part of your karma. And so all of those things, when we're in trouble, we can count on, we can trust in, right? If you have a lot of great friends and great connections, if you lose your job, guess what? There's a lot of people there to help. Again, it's not that we're blindly trusting that everything will be okay, which is naive. That would be a naive thing to think. Instead, we're trusting that whatever challenges come, that we'll be able to work with them, adapt to them, and survive them. Think about how many times in your life we've catastrophized, right? How many times do you think, oh, it's all going to be over and I'm going to be on the street, or I'm going to fail in school, or life's going to be over as far as I know it? Endlessly, right? How many times were we right out of out of all those times? How many times that I was sure I was going to fail and just lose everything and be a bum on the street? Guess what? I haven't been right about that so far. Joe, please share.
Would this be something like trusting our intuition, trusting our gut a little bit more now that we know that we're on the right path, that we're trying to be good Buddhists, and so
Yes,
our intuition would align better with good things, right? Good
yes.
results.
But
Okay.
that question can be a little complicated. So yeah, we trust in our karma, right? As we mentioned, all those things are karma. But I had a person at one of the classes bring up a really interesting point. And she said to me, she says, well, I have terrible intuition. Everything I choose always turns out to be wrong. How do I practice trust? And I was a bit floored. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't think about that side of it. But the point is that this practice is personal. So if she feels that way, then maybe that's not an aspect to trust in. But maybe she has someone she goes to that helps her with decisions, and she can trust in that guidance. Or she can, I mean, somehow she still survived, right? She's
Yeah.
still alive and she was an
Yeah.
old lady.
Yeah.
It's like, well, something's working for you. You're sick, you're in
Yeah.
your 60s and you're existent. So yeah, it can be complex. We have to figure out how it works for ourselves. But guaranteed we all have something to trust in. If nothing else, she could
Okay.
trust in me that I could help her.
I found as I started the last few years, as I got further into my Buddhist studies, I felt better about my intuition and stayed a little bit closer to it, and it seemed to work out. So I guess
Yeah,
I'll keep going in
and
that
intuition
direction.
is something we can improve, right? So with wisdom, with experience in life, we can
Yeah.
develop better intention and make better choices. So yeah, you got it. But
Cool.
there is that there might be areas in your life that you're not sure about trusting. Maybe it's your husband. Do I really gotta trust in that guy? But anyways, yeah. So the actual practice of trust is easy. So when anxiety arises, you simply say the word trust, either aloud or to yourself. Can you see me walking around the house? Trust, trust. Um, while at the same time, you reflect on your skills, your abilities, your experience, those real things that you're trusting in. So, so again, for Buddhists, this also includes trusting in our practice, our path, and our karma, that positive momentum you've created through virtuous thoughts, intentions, and deeds. The real secret to success in this practice is being clear about exactly what you're trusting in. You really have to make that clear. If you don't, it's just wishful thinking, right? So, an example, say you're worried that you might get laid off from work. So you say the word trust, trust. And I was joking before. I don't say it like in an elaborate way. You just say it softly, trust, right? Um, and then you reflect on your skills, your abilities, your experience, the connections you have with other people, and you think to yourself, no matter what happens, I'll be okay. I have skills, I have talents, I have friends and connections. It'll be okay. That's kind of how it works. And another slide for you. I told you I was going to entertain you. Okay, coming up, one of my very favorite quotes of all time. A bird sitting on a tree is never afraid of the branch breaking because its trust is not in the branch, but in its own wings. Isn't that extraordinary? That's what we're talking about. You're the bird. You can fly away. You're just temporarily on that branch. That's what we're talking about by trust. And I tell you, I rely on this practice a lot in my life, and it really works. Any questions out there? What do you guys think of this practice of trust? Good. I got a couple thumbs up. Great. Any other questions about today's subject? What do you think about some of these tools we gave you for working with suffering? Oh, I think you guys are going to have a great week. Dana, please share.
Um, so another antidote, which goes along with what you've been talking about, like when the thoughts come up that are embarrassing or whatever, or the when you're not trusting and you have doubts, the trust that has really worked well for me. But the other thing is, well, like especially when thoughts come up out of nowhere of some embarrassing or whatever, I the trust in the Buddhism and this concept of interdependence and that things are impermanent really has helped me. So that when something is embarrassing, I say, well, I'm not that person anymore. And as I've gotten to learn about impermanence and over again, I'm able to sort of like, well, that was then, I'm not that today. And and I'm able to let it go rather than to add another thought about it, like, that's going to happen again.
But even back then, you didn't own those things. Those things arose out of afflictions themselves.
Right. Now I know
Even
that, but
back
I didn't,
then.
didn't
Yeah.
know it at the time. And so
Well,
then I add,
another way of thinking about this is the idea of purification in Buddhism. So we talked about the three roots, the three virtuous roots and the three afflicted roots. Um, the idea of purification is that all of this negativity, all these afflictive and afflictive mental states, thoughts, memories, they arise out of, in a sense, out of habit.
mm,
And the more we're on the Buddhist path, and the more we practice virtue and goodness and productive and skillful mental states, the more we get habituated to them. And like the story of the two wolves, by feeding the good wolf, the
hmm
bad one just falls away. The bad wolf is those afflictions. The bad wolf is those negative memories and negative thoughts. So the path of purification. So you can trust in the Buddhist path of purification that you just keep going, and more they're going to fall away. It's been completely true in my case. That was very good, Dana. Thank you. Excellent point. Okay, hey, we're running a little long. Let's finish up. So let's recap a little bit about what we learned today. Today we learned about the power of understanding and acceptance in working with our suffering, and that our practices of the threefold training and 4 steps of acceptance remain as our primary method for lessening and transcending our suffering, working at the very root of our afflictions. We talked about the antidotes of cultivation of positive states of mind, um, to transcend negative thoughts, and the antidote of patience as non-reactivity of when problems arise, when difficulties arise, become the camera and just take in what's happening and hold back before you react. So instead of reacting, you can respond with wisdom and skill. Finally, we shared our main practices of this week, which are the practice of disidentifying ourselves and others from our afflictions, and the practice of trust, trusting in ourselves and our abilities. So, to recap, let's see what that looks like here. We're going to be learning to disidentify ourselves from our afflictions, applying and experimenting with our new practice of trust, continuing the cultivation of the threefold training, and applying the 4 steps of acceptance. I'll make that slide available to everybody after class. Next week, we're going to be on our 5th week of our Skillful Living program, and we're going to be exploring the Skillful Living lifestyle, which I think is really awesome. Always remember, I'm just a click away for any help you might need. And lastly, although our program is free, our group does rely on donations to continue its work. If you're enjoying the program and you'd like to ensure that it remains available to countless others, consider making a donation on sbtonline.org. And with that said, for the month of July, we are on having a summer fundraiser, and we could really use your help, everybody. So if you can, dig in and see if you can help. Let's end today's class with our altruistic affirmation. May all be healthy, may all be prosperous, may all be well, may all be present, free of past regret and future worry, may all abide in constant appreciation, which is the source of great joy and contentment, and may all realize their true nature and the true nature of reality, which is awakening. Thank you all for coming. Remember, the SBT community was created for one purpose: to support you, the practitioner. Boy, did I have fun. Did you have fun? I think an important class. I can't wait to practice with everybody all week long. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Venerable Tarpa. Thank you very much.
Tarpa.